Hey there, everyone, and welcome to our very first podcast, Can You See What I See? And Vic, my beautiful co-host, I wonder if she can see what I see. I think I've got a bit of a gut feeling she can. I see a kinder, happier world where people are safe and empowered, inspired to choose greater. So Vic, can you see what I see?
Oh, wow. I tell you, I want to see that. I really do want to see that, more of it. But yes, I know it's a possibility. So thanks, Grace. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you say you know it's a possibility, because if you do know it, you see it, right? If you can perceive it, then you actually be it inside yourself. And that's what I really look forward to with this podcast, hearing what the listeners know that we don't know, that they can see what we can't see. And hopefully we'll also share things that we see that maybe they would like to see, and encourage them to do so. So a little bit about me. Oh my goodness. So I've been through everything from rape, domestic violence, really bad car accident, all sorts of things. I won't go into too much detail except to say I have chronic post-traumatic stress. And I've gone through my own, or actually not gone through, it's an ongoing journey with my own counselling. And as I've gone through this, I've said to my counsellor, oh my goodness, like everyone needs this information. And I was chatting with my friend Vic, and she's like, you know what, let's do this. Let's actually inspire a world that we see. So that's Yeah, go for it. I was just going to say that's exactly what Vic and I were talking about, and I was going to throw it to you. So perfect timing. Go for it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Grace. I've been saying for a long time, it's time for that different conversation. And so what we're going to see, I'm going to see what you can see about trauma today. So what that different conversation might look and feel like.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited that, people like Oprah and, Prince Harry, Lady Gaga, it's getting out there, the trauma-informed society, because my actual deep knowing is that this reality is traumatic. And, I used to think that, post-traumatic stress only happened with people that went to war. However, I've realised now that it's actually about stacking. Chronic post-traumatic stress is this ongoing drip factor of stress. And it can also be you imagining or seeing stress can solicit that. So trauma is very, very complex. And, one of the things that I would love us to get to is that when, in Australia we talk about Karens, like, oh, she's being a Karen. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's trauma. But before we get into any
Karen?
Well, I think
What's a Karen?
I think a Karen is actually a dissociated part. But I mean, we can get onto that later, because I want the listeners to hear about who the heck are you? So, tell us about yourself.
Okay, love to. Thank you. I first met Grace about 15 years ago, and I was always struck by your presence, Grace, and I felt a deep connection with you without knowing anything about you at a head level. And since then, I've had the pleasure of sharing my own personal life journey with you, and some of those have been through some very challenging times. And one of the things I really liked about talking with you was that you never made anybody wrong, or you didn't blame others or situations. It was more about, is there something I'm not seeing right now that if I could see, it might just change my life for the better? And there are a number of special people in my life that I trust to point out what's in my blind spot, and Great, you're one of them. Thank you. But with some of my professional background, I was a project manager for Corroboree 2000, where 250,000 people walked over Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of reconciliation. That was it was wonderful to work with our First Nations peoples at that time. And even though I'd been working in Prime Minister's Department and I'd held senior positions, at age 18 I was working for the Governor-General, but for as long as I could remember I was often filled with self-doubt. And I fed that belief with stories like, I didn't have a degree, who am I to think I can do this when there are others much more qualified, more clever than I was. Oh dear, it won't be long before they realise I'm a fraud, etc., etc. But at the wash-up of Corroboree, Ray Martin acknowledged everyone who'd contributed to make the event a success, and then he stopped and said that if it wasn't for Vicky Scott, it wouldn't have happened. And this was gobsmacking for me, because I thought, I didn't really do anything. I just made others, made sure they knew what was required, and I helped them to identify any blockages along the way.
You know,
But
it's I really do have to interrupt there. It's, you know, I didn't do anything. You know, you made it happen. And it is that self-doubt that, you know, you don't see your own value sometimes. Keep going, keep going.
Well, when people ask how I did it, I used to say, oh, I've got a good gut feel. But yeah, you're right, Grace. That aha moment for me was recognising that my good gut feel, as I called it, was actually my innate wisdom talking to me. And I seemed to be guided when to phone or meet with someone. And I remember when I got that feeling and I would call, sure enough, things had gone off the rails. But until then, I hadn't acknowledged that my good gut feel was actually my very own personal GPS. And I had no language around that. It wasn't talked about, was it, back then?
No.
And I could hardly use the skill in an interview by saying I have a good gut feel.
Yeah, that is a superpower. And imagine hiring someone that had such a good connection to their gut that they could, you know, see in the future, oh, this person, no, don't hire that person, or definitely hire that person, or we need to make this move. It's priceless.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the more I got more confident about using some language around that, the more people used to say, well, actually, yes, I know what you mean, but there was no vocabulary around it.
Correct.
And so
yeah.
It really hit me that, well, hang on, perhaps there's a whole different library that we haven't even tapped into yet.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, a whole different library. And, you know, that's the thing with trauma. We're looking at the survival library and, you know, the bear, the problem, the issue, when there's a whole different library. I love that.
Wow. Yeah, I like what you just said.
I could see what you could see just then.
You said something before about self-doubt. Has that been your experience about being related to trauma or something that happened?
My gut is actually saying that self-doubt isn't who we are. It's not part of our natural personality. And I go so far as talking about disenfranchised parts or dissociated parts. And I love to give the example of, imagine you're a flower and in the center of the flower is your beingness. It's that gut, it's that knowing, it's that connectedness to everything. And then the petals are aspects of you that you can call upon. So, for example, now I'm speaking at a podcast, so there'll be an aspect of loving that and doing that. However, there are also petals from the past trauma, and I call those dissociative or disenfranchised petals. And as much as, yes, they are you from a past experience, they're not actually helping you now. And so it's really important to recognize that one of those petals could be self-doubt, and one of those parts could have a real connection to self-doubt, but it's not actually who you are. And I always say to people, if you're feeling like, I don't know whether I should do this, I'm doubting this, or I'm confused about that, generally speaking, what I say is that chances are you're not in the center of your flower. You actually have confused yourself and you think you're a petal. And that one petal might be the petal of doubt, or one of your dissociative parts, for example. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It's such a basic language, but you talked about, us being a more trauma-informed society, and I'm so thrilled to see, the medical profession are now contributing to this vocabulary. I love that book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, What
Brilliant
Happened
book.
to You.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And it's conversations on trauma, resilience and healing. And I think, wow, I wished I'd had that book available to me. Because really, as you said, some people have been through very, very traumatic experiences, and mental health disorders can result as a result of that. But for most of us, sometimes it's just around not getting the emotional nurturing that we required as young ones. And I know in my case, I was number 4 in a family of 7 children. And my poor mum, gosh, they were wonderful parents, but 4 kids, I think the eldest hadn't turned 4.5 by the time I was born. So there's a lot of us that really probably have had it from something that we just say, I'll get over it. Others had it much worse. So that's been part of our language around, that there's always somebody worse off, instead of validating our own emotions.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that I know about this planet, I guess, is that we think we need to judge something to change it, or we think we need to get into enough pain, to avoid it and to make a change. And the world that I see is a world where you can acknowledge what's not working, but then actually look at creating something different. And, one of the things that was huge for me was recognizing that everything starts with energy. And, every creation, every change, one of the things, I'm passionate about domestic violence, and I hear a lot, why don't they just leave? And the very first thing I say is you can have the money, you can have the support, but if you don't have the energy to leave, it's not going to happen. And the opposite's true. If you've got no money, no support, but you've got the energy to leave, you will. And that's the same with anything in business or relationship. If you don't have the energy, and when you're on your petals, you're only functioning from a part of yourself. And if one of those pedals that you're on, who's in the driver's seat, is a dissociated part, it's a part that's not really helping you right now, even though it thinks it is, you can, behave in a way, for example, one of the dissociated parts might be 5 years old. And then all of a sudden you don't have the ability. One of the things that we talk about with the trauma brain is you don't have the ability to see possibilities. Scientifically proven that when you're in survival brain, you don't have access to the rest of the brain. And it's only until you really get the languaging around it and say, hang on a minute, the way I'm behaving, is this actually me or a petal? Oh, okay, come back. And, one of the things that a lot of people don't realise is I do believe that the majority of the planet are functioning from petals, and they're just sort of hopping between the petals, and they think it's them being who they are. And what I'd like to see is, more safety, security and support out there for everybody, because until you've got that safety, security and support, you can't change. You can't acknowledge, oh, maybe I'm being a bit of a Karen. Maybe I'm being one of those petals that isn't actually contributing to my life anymore.
Yeah, well, how many times do we use the language of, part of me wants to do that, but another part of me is really,
exactly.
I think, wow.
Yeah. Or like, oh, wow, that just sounded like my mum or my dad, or who was that just showed up? Sometimes you sort of think, oh, what was that about? Or you've bared witness to it with somebody else. It's like, whoa, he's never said that, or she's never done that. And chances are it's one of those dissociative parts, or, trying to seek attention and untether. Yeah.
Yeah. Grace, one of the things being a project manager that comes to me always is we forget that our life is actually the biggest project we're ever going to do. And
I love that.
Oh, well, I know with any project, once I can see the vision, it doesn't matter which road I take to get there, because I know where I'm going to end up. But we don't do that to our kids. Growing up, we've sort of had decades of, hundreds of years probably, of trying to make people fit a certain mould, and the definition of success is all around money, position, power, status. But the thing that I get is, well, how do you want to feel when the day comes where our life is over? And I don't feel that the language of possibility is part of our everyday vocabulary. So or as you said, you talk about we're in survival most of our lives. So can you give me examples? I know you and I have talked about this. You've talked, about the when you go into fight, flight, freeze and fawn. Can you say some more about the fawn?
Yeah. So one of the things that happens when you're in survival brain is it's instead of being into possibilities where you have access to your whole brain and you can, expand out, the world's expansive, you can look around and see what's required. Like Vic, when you were organising the walk across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you weren't just focused on the literal bridge, you were focused on everything. And as problems arose, you brought in the people that were required from a place of expansion. But when you're in survival brain, you end up focusing on one thing, the bear, the bear that's just coming at you, the thing that you need to survive from. And so what happens with that is that it will trigger, we all have triggers where one of those pedals hops in the driver's seat, and sometimes that pedal, as I said, could be a 5-year-old, and so what they can look like is fight, In other words, you're going to fight the bear. So if something's being triggered, someone said something or something's happened in your environment, you'll fight. Or you'll freeze. You know, in nature, when you've seen those animals when they're being hunted and they know that they don't have the energy to keep running, they just pretend and lay dead. And there's a good chance in that situation that the animal that's chasing them will just stop because it's not fun anymore. You know, as typical with psychopaths as well. You know, they want the excitement, and when the excitement stops, it's like, oh, I'll just go on to my next victim. So, you know, so that's the fight, flight. Flight is when you run. You know, you absolutely bolt from your, withdraw, bolt. But then there's the fawning. Now, the fawning is one that a lot of people don't know about, and it's like the people pleaser. And it's usually highly effective with domestic violence, where you become who they want you to become, and they'll use all their tactics to get you to actually almost forget who you are. And it's a slow process. You know, one of the researchers has shown, you know, for example, with domestic violence and these sort of personalities, they're very happy to wait for a year to 2 years to train their victim. So it's not like they just get in there and start abusing straight away. It's a very calculated thing for the majority of these type of personalities. And a lot of people don't know that. So so there's the fight where you're fighting. There's the freeze where you play dead. There's the fawning. And then there's the flight, which is just, you know, back out, disappear, make an excuse. You know, I always hear in my head, beep, 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 you know, like reverse, reverse.
Yeah. Well, you know, you talk about it in relation to domestic violence, and I hear, you know, the seriousness of that, and I have actually witnessed that at close hand, but never having had a name for it, I guess. You can observe it, but it's not something we've got vocabulary around, or we're getting it now. But, you know, that actually reminds me, talk about fawning and people pleasing, that happens in the workplace.
Sure does.
For instance, if people don't feel secure in their job, if they're a contractor or a consultant, or if just a casual, these days there are more and more casual jobs, fewer permanent ones, but you'll actually hold part of you back because you think if you step outside what you think is expected of you, then it's not safe. You may lose your job. So I actually think there's so much about humanity that we're missing because of this very thing called survival brain and fawning as a result of it, which puts it in a much bigger scale than DV. It's actually stopping our planet thrive and survive.
It's in every aspect. You're completely correct. And, you know, unless you feel safe, secure and supported, you're not going to get the best out of that person, whether it's an employee or your partner. You know, imagine being with somebody romantically, for example, where you feel absolutely safe, secure and supported. That you'll show up. All of you will show up. And it's the most delicious thing you could possibly have in relationship, whether it's intimate or friendship. But imagine being in the workplace. Imagine being in a workplace where your whole team is there and you feel totally safe, supported, secure. You're going to step up. You're going to be brave. You're going to try things that you would normally, you know, be hesitant to try. And you're correct in saying what we've got is a planet where everyone's, you know, presenting their watered down self that's safe. And that includes, you know, governments, you know, they're frightened to legislate effectively because they don't feel so safe, secure and supported. You know, our policing, they don't feel safe, secure and supported to actually go beyond or try something different. Absolutely.
No, as a society, we're quick to jump on them, aren't we, but it's showing up in there's no trust in politicians. You know, there's a whole raft of things that and, you know, I love reading Dr. Brené Brown. She writes a lot about vulnerability, and it's exactly what you're talking about. If you don't feel safe, secure and supported, then you're not going to allow yourself to be vulnerable in that place. And one of the things she says about it is vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creation and change. I love that. And wouldn't it create greater if we all allowed ourselves to feel vulnerable?
Yeah, and, you know, one of the things I love about her, I was listening to a podcast with her and she gave the example of two football teams. And she said, just imagine two identical football teams and one of their main players, has something wrong with their shoulder or whatever. However, on one team, the player has said to the coach, "Hey, coach, I've got this sore shoulder." He's been vulnerable. He's saying, "I've got this problem," right? And then the coach goes, "Okay, no problem. We'll, let the other team members know, and we'll all, protect you and rally behind you, knowing that you have that vulnerability today." And then the other team, the guy doesn't share that he's got a sore shoulder. He doesn't want to be vulnerable. He wants to be the tough, just push through the pain, be a real man, And she said, "Who would you back on? Like, which team would you support? Which team do you think would do better?"
Wow.
And I just loved that, because there's such strength in vulnerability, and that example just so beautifully illustrates, of course you're going to go for the team who's open and honest with each other. So if there is a vulnerability and a weakness, they're going to be looked after. And also, just from the psychological aspect, imagine the team being, it's okay to say, "I've got a sore shoulder." You're not going to get booted out. You're not going to get victimized. You're going to get supported. You're going to feel safe and secure that, you can still play. And even if you can't play, you're still going to be, looked after. So this is where, I see a world where we're functioning from our petals. And one of the parts people tend to have is what I call a manager part, or a protector part, usually both. And they're the ones that go, "Oh, no, don't tell that you got a sore shoulder." And you think it's you making that, having that thought, "Oh yeah, I better not tell." And so what I always say to people is, please make sure, ask the question, are you coming from that gut? And, Vic, when you talked about your superpower with, your connection to your gut, one of the things I really do want to get across is a lot of people in trauma, they have a misconception that they have a bad gut because they've gotten themselves into situations that nobody would, for example. And what I want to say is it's not true. Your gut is incredibly strong, but when you've got a protector part, or you're functioning from a dissociative part, for example, then you don't have access or clear access to the center of the flower. And so part of, understanding trauma and untethering from these dissociative parts, you'll spend more and more and more time with the ability to connect to that gut that cannot be changed. A perpetrator cannot actually mess with your gut. So there's nothing wrong with your gut. It's just more your ability to tap into it. That's the issue. And, some people don't even have the energy to tap into their gut.
I just got there's a real strength in that, isn't it? Grace, do you think there's something that, until our next podcast, so it'd be lovely to hear what others say about that. But I'm wondering if there's something we can do between now and then.
Yeah,
to help us recognise, about those parts, perhaps.
Absolutely. One of the things could just be languaging around it. So next time you're feeling confused or feeling just off in some way, I'm pretty certain that it'll be a part more than your actual centre of the flower. So just ask the question. So if you're feeling sad, for example, or confused, am I actually feeling sad and confused? Or is that just a part? And if you get the awareness that it's a part, there's lots of strategies, tips, tools and techniques that we'll be going over in and around our discussions with these podcasts on numerous topics. Also, Google is your friend as well, and that brilliant book and Brene Brown. There's so many people out there now that can talk about these things. But I was certainly, if you're finding that you're spending a lot of time in your petals, go talk to somebody. And you once you sort of get back into the center of the flower, your whole world will change. It really will. So yeah, just get with that languaging on am I actually sad or is it a part? And just that awareness alone can help you feel more connected to your gut and that center of the flower. And then the other thing is stacking. Acknowledge, be grateful for the things that are working and the things that are going well. Acknowledge it and stack and stack and stack. Because one of the things that happens when you're in survival brain is that you go from that expanded to the very contracted laser beam, the bear. And so what we want to do is we want to expand out. We don't want to keep, going into the bear, because that's when you've got your cortisol, your adrenaline, and you don't have access to the rest of your brain. You don't have access to infinite possibilities, So, yeah, that's probably what I'd say, just positive stacking and notice if you're in the middle of the flower or on the petals.
Oh, I love that. I think on the website we'll also put some other books that It's the mind-gut connection, and there's a number of others. When the body says no, the cost of hidden stress. So doctors, the medical profession are now recognising that this, too much adrenaline, cortisol, all of that, those that affect our biochemistry, they're actually affecting our health, but we don't connect the dots.
Yeah.
We've compartmentalised ourselves so much that, but that's a story for another podcast, I think, Grace.
I think there's numerous topics, just like there's numerous petals. And, one of those parts can actually be in charge of the somatic, and be in charge of your health, and can actually go so far as to create, dis-ease and disease in your body. So, what if you're not exhausted, tired or lazy? What if you're just... you've had this ongoing trauma, and when you start to look at that and heal from that, you'll be surprised how much energy you get, and that you can actually thrive and be happy again. And that's what I see, Vic. That's the world I see.
Oh, I love what you see, and I want to see more of it too. Thank you, Grace.
I love what you see too. And guys, please acknowledge there's so much that you see as well. When you're in the middle of your flower, there's stuff that you know that no one else knows. And I'd love to see what you see. And as well as, Vic, I love seeing what you see. And let's all together create a world that we see that's beyond all the suffering that's there now. What if there's a greater choice and a greater world that's possible? Anyway, lovely to connect with you guys. Find us on the podcast. You'll see ways to connect with Vicky and myself. And, of course, Vicky just mentioned as well, she'll list all those amazing books out there just to point you in the right direction. But till next week, have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.